Hi everyone and welcome back to another episode where I compare Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn games in different genres. And in this episode we will take a look at early shoot-em-ups for the two consoles. On the Sega Saturn we will take a look at Layer Section, which was released on the 14th of September 1995. It was released later in North America and Europe as Galactic Attack. On the Sony PlayStation, I will take a look at Philosoma, which was released on the 28th of July 1995 in Japan, and it was released a while later in North America and Europe. Technically, these are not the very first shoot-em-ups released for the two consoles, as both got a port of Gradius, and there's also a Raiden Project game for PlayStation, which was released in early 1995. But these two games combine both 2D and 3D. Okay, so let's begin with Philosoma, which was released exclusively on the Sony PlayStation. Philosoma begins with this long and beautiful CGI intro. This was actually one of the earliest games announced for the Sony PlayStation. I suppose it was planned to be a launch game in Japan, but for some reasons it was delayed until summer of 1995. The developers of Philosoma really wanted to take advantage of the new 32-bit hardware. So they tried to be creative by letting you play your ship from different angles. Here, for instance, you're being chased by this train in this corridor, and you're shooting at him from your behind. And in this stage you're flying horizontally and shooting at the ships coming towards you. You have 4 basic weapons which you can upgrade: a Vulcan gun, a laser, a charge shot, and a gun which you use to fire at enemies coming from your behind. I have to mention that Philosoma was one of the first games I played on the Sony PlayStation. In the summer of 1995, I was in my local video game store and they had just received this from Japan, and I was totally floored. This looked amazing back then. I mean, the graphics, the music, the different type of stages, it totally floored me. I hadn't seen anything like this back then. The transparency effects on the laser, it looked totally amazing. Philosoma didn't get any great reviews by the game press back then, and I always felt that they were a bit unfair. This is still an early shoot-em-up for the console. Apart from a really good soundtrack, I would say that the graphics still holds up fairly well. I mean, just look at this stage, for instance, where you're flying into a cylinder. Which is directly followed up by this stage where you're trying to escape this enemy base, and the doors are being shut down in front of you and the enemies are coming from all directions. I really feel that the developers managed to create this variation in Philosoma, so I don't agree with the reviews that the game is dull. But now when playing through the game 30 years later, I would say that the game is a bit short, so yeah, it's a bit short and it's not very difficult, so it's quite an easy shoot-em-up. So for those of you who enjoy shoot-em-ups but are afraid of the genre because there's so many difficult shoot-em-ups or bullet hell shoot-em-ups, I would still say that I would recommend Philosoma because it's fairly easy and it plays well and the controls are great. It's very responsive. The music is great, the graphics still holds up really well, so give it a try if you haven't tried it before. Okay, let's move over to Layer Section on the Sega Saturn. So this game is based on the arcade game Layer Section. As I mentioned, this was called Galactic Attack in North America. The reason why the aspect ratio looks a bit weird is because Layer Section was a game that played in Tate mode in the arcades. And the good thing is that in the options you can change from the Saturn mode to the arcade Tate mode. So let's try out playing it in Tate mode. Okay, so I flipped my CRT. So let's see how it looks in Tate mode. Now this looks much better. Similar to Philosoma with its constant change of camera angle, layer section also stirs things up a bit. Here you have two different weapons, one normal spread shot which can be upgraded, and a target weapon which is basically a laser. So the target weapon, it works similar to the target weapon in Panzer Dragoon if you played that. So you target enemies and you hold the button and send away lasers. And depending on how many enemies you target is also the amount of lasers you can shoot away. And you can also upgrade it to target more enemies. The target laser is mainly used for enemies which are below you. So on this stage, for instance, you have enemies which are approaching you from two different planes. So you have the enemies below you which you can take down with your target laser, and then you have the enemies on the higher plane which you can shoot down with your spread shot. This is a really cool concept, and one which I wish was used much more in shoot 'em ups. And they did a great job here of creating this depth in every stage where you have to keep track of enemies approaching you from different planes. Layer section is much more hectic compared to Philosoma, which makes sense because this was originally an arcade title. I also have to mention that the boss battles are far more interesting in layer section compared to Philosoma. So here, for instance, you're taking out this large battleship, you're taking out his cannons with your target laser, at the same time as you're taking out the rest of the enemies with your spread shot. While layer section was only ported to the Saturn, the sequel Ray Storm was actually ported both to Saturn, PlayStation, as well as Windows. So what do I think about layer section? Well, I must say that this is one of the better shoot 'em ups I've played on the Sega Saturn. A lot of people are hyping up Radiant Silvergun, but I must say that this is up there easily on the Sega Saturn. The gameplay is excellent, you have great control over your ship, the graphics are great and have aged really well, and you probably noticed that this game contains a lot of transparency effects, and it shows that the Saturn could handle those with ease if the developers really put the effort into it. And overall I must say that this is a fantastic shoot 'em up, and one I would really recommend to all shoot 'em up fans. So hunt it up, and I believe that the Japanese version is a bit easier to find, so give it a try. So even though I have strong nostalgia for Philosoma, I have to give the point to layer section here. This is a great shoot 'em up, and another point for the Sega Saturn. So that's it guys for this time, and I'll see you next time in the next video. Take care.